Hello, Symposiast. I'm Dr. Angela Puca, Religious Studies PhD and University Lecturer, and this is your online resource for the academic study of magic esotericism, paganism, shamanism, and all things occult. Today, we delve into one of the most enduring and elusive questions in both philosophy and occultism. What is the self in magical practice? In magical traditions, whether ceremonial, chaos, or folk, the self is rarely a passive observer. It is the subject, the agent, and often the very instrument of transformation. But what is this self that casts a circle, intones divine names, or travels the astral plane? Is it unified? Is it fragmented? Is it an essence to be discovered or a performance to be crafted? To explore this, let us turn first to philosophy. In the Western philosophical tradition, the nature of the self has been a central and contested theme, variously defined, defended, and dismantled across centuries of intellectual inquiry. The self has appeared as a metaphysical certainty, a psychological fiction, and even an illusion, depending on the vantage point of the thinker in question. René Descartes, writing in the early 17th century amidst the rise of scientific rationalism, offered one of the most enduring formulations of the self in his Meditationes de prima philosophia from 1641. His famous dictum, Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, was intended not as a casual observation, but as a foundational axiom. For Descartes, even if all else were subject to radical doubt, the very act of doubting implied a thinking subject. Thus, the cogito became the undoubtable ground of knowledge, and the self was conceived as a res cogitans, a thinking substance distinct from the res extensa, the extended substance of the body and the material world. This Cartesian dualism introduced a conception of the self as immaterial, stable, and self-transparent, an internal witness that exists prior to and apart from the contingencies of sensory experience. In doing so, Descartes effectively enshrined the self as a kind of inner sanctum, immune to the vicissitudes of the external world, and laid the groundwork for modern notions of subjectivity rooted in rational autonomy and introspection. This confident vision of a unified, self-knowing subject was sharply challenged in the 18th century by David Hume, a Scottish empiricist whose skeptical epistemology undermined the very notion of a stable self. In a treatise of human nature, Hume famously declared that he could never observe a self beyond a succession of sensory impressions and mental states. When I enter most intimately into what I call myself, he wrote, I always stumble on some particular perception or other. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception. For Hume, the self was not a substance but a bundle, what later came to be called the bundle theory of the self, composed of transient thoughts, feelings, and sensations, bound together by habit and memory. Rather than a fixed point of identity, the self became a kind of narrative illusion, a flickering sequence of events rather than a coherent essence. This radically deconstructive move placed Hume at odds not only with Descartes, but with the broader rationalist tradition, as it challenged any metaphysical claims to a permanent soul or unified consciousness. A different, though equally influential model emerged in the 20th century through the work of Carl Gustav Jung, whose analytical psychology drew upon both empirical observation and mythic symbolic structures. For Jung, the self was not to be found merely in conscious awareness, nor could it be reduced to a fragmented flux. Instead, he proposed a distinction between the ego, the conscious sense of identity, and the self, with the capital S, a more encompassing totality that included the unconscious, both personal and collective. The self, in Jungian terms, was not an illusion but a goal, the telos of psychological development, the center and circumference of the psyche. It found expression in symbols of wholeness, mandalas, sacred geometries, divine figures, and served as the archetype of integration and unity. In Jung's theory of individuation, the task of the individual is to reconcile the ego with the self through an ongoing process of shadow integration, symbolic engagement, and inner transformation. Notably, Jung acknowledged the resonance between his model of the self and mystical traditions, including the Gnostic pleroma, the Indian Atman, and even the Western esoteric notion of the holy guardian angel, suggesting that the psychological journey toward wholeness mirrored spiritual trajectories long encoded in religious and magical systems. So the Western philosophical canon offers no singular answer to the question of what the self is. Instead, it reveals a tension between substance and process, essence and illusion, stability and flux, that continues to animate both philosophical and esoteric explorations of subjectivity. Whether as the rational anchor of Descartes' metaphysics, the skeptical deconstruction of Hume's empiricism, or the archetypal totality of Jung's analytical psychology, each model invites a different vision of what it means to be a self, and by extension, what it means to be a magician, mystic, or seeker of transformation. Now, let us consider how these philosophical ideas compare with esoteric models of selfhood. But before that, allow me to remind you that this project of delivering free scholarship on esotericism can only exist thanks to your support. So if you have the means, please consider supporting my work on Patreon, PayPal, Ko-fi, super thanking me in the comments, checking out my services at Dr. Angela Puka, and really any kind of help will make a massive difference to me. So thank you so much for considering, and you find all the links in bio, the info box, a pinned comment, everywhere. So thank you again. I really appreciate you considering supporting me. So within the esoteric system of Thelema, articulated by Aleister Crowley in the early 20th century, the concept of the true will occupies a central metaphysical and ethical position. Unlike common understandings of will as personal desire or volition, the true will in Thelemic doctrine signifies a deeper ontological imperative, a unique trajectory or purpose that is intrinsic to the individual's being and yet harmoniously embedded in the unfolding order of the cosmos. As Crowley states in the Liber al vel legis, the Book of the Law, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, suggesting that the realization of one's true will is not only a personal spiritual imperative, but also a cosmic law in its own right. This will is not to be conflated with passing whims or egoic preferences. Rather, it is akin to a divine calling, an existential alignment with the individual's essential nature and function within the universe. Yet, this formulation raises critical questions about subjectivity and agency. Who or what discovers the true will? Is it the ego with its contingent social conditioning and psychological defenses, or a more transcendent dimension of the self? Crowley's own writings point to a perhaps hierarchical model of selfhood. He distinguishes between the surface personality, the ego self, and the holy guardian angel, which he regarded not merely as a tutelary spirit, but as the personification of one's highest, truest being. In The Vision and the Voice and Liber Samek, Crowley presents the invocation of the holy guardian angel as a ritual and spiritual climax, a process of alignment in which the fragmented ego comes into conscious contact with its divine counterpart. Importantly, Crowley resists attempts to reduce the holy guardian angel to a mere psychological projection. For him, the angel represents a real and autonomous intelligence, albeit one that is paradoxically identical with the magician's deepest identity. So, in a way, you could argue that Thelemic cosmology implies a dualistic anthropology: the profane self, fragmented and immersed in illusion, and the angelic self, unified, eternal, and luminous with divine purpose. A similarly layered anthropology appears in Hermetic Qabalah, which draws heavily from Jewish mystical models, particularly those associated with the Sefer Yetzirah, the Zohar, and Lurianic Kabbalah, but reframed within a Western esoteric context. The human soul, according to this framework, comprises multiple strata, often delineated as nefesh, animal or vital soul, ruach, the rational or moral self, and neshamach, the divine or intuitive soul. Some systems expand into 5 levels, adding chayach and yeshdah, but the tripartite model remains foundational in many magical contexts. These soul components are often mapped onto the tree of life, corresponding to the lower and higher spheres of the sephirotic structure. The magician's path is thus envisioned as an ascent, a process of inner refinement and spiritual integration aimed at transcending the lower appetites of the nefesh, cultivating the moral discernment of the ruach, and ultimately realizing the divine illumination of the neshamah. This is not just an abstract metaphysical journey, but one enacted ritually and meditatively through practices of invocation, pathworking, and inner alchemy. The self in this paradigm is not singular but stratified, a microcosm of the cosmic hierarchy, and magical work is framed as the harmonization of these internal layers. In sharp contrast, chaos magic emerging in the late 20th century through figures such as Peter J. Carroll and Ray Sherwin offers a markedly anti-essentialist conception of selfhood. Influenced by postmodern philosophy, particularly the deconstructionist currents of Nietzsche, Foucault, and Derrida, chaos magicians often reject the idea of a fixed or discoverable essence. Instead, the self is conceived as performative, protean, and constructed, a series of roles, narratives, and symbolic configurations that can be altered, discarded, and reinvented at will. As Carroll writes in the Liber Null, belief itself is a tool, and identity, like belief, is a function of magical utility rather than a metaphysical truth. In this view, the self is not a hidden kernel to be unveiled, but a tactical construct, a mask or sigil animated by intention, aesthetic, and will. Here, magical practice becomes a form of psychodramatic authorship. The magician creates provisional selves to enact particular rituals, align with desired outcome, or inhabit mythic archetypes. Subjectivity is not a stable foundation, but a creative interface, a shifting matrix of personas that reflect both internal states and magical intent. This stance echoed Judith Butler's theory of performativity in gender and identity, albeit retooled for an esoteric register. In such a model, the power of magic lies not in recovering lost authenticity, but in the strategic deployment of identity itself as a medium of transformation. The magician is both playwright and performer, creating meaning through ritualized performance rather than metaphysical discovery. Thus, across these traditions, Thelemic, Kabbalistic, and chaos, the self appears not as a monolithic entity, but as a contested site, sometimes a divine spark awaiting recognition, sometimes a layered soul to be navigated, and sometimes a fiction to be deliberately rewritten. Each paradigm offers a different metaphysical grammar of the self, and each locates magical efficacy in a different aspect of subjectivity: essence, integration, or invention. Where then does this leave our inquiry into the metaphysical self? Is the self in esoteric practice a unified totality, as in Jung's archetypal self or Crowley's holy guardian angel, an inner divinity awaiting recognition? Or is it, as Hume suggested, a fleeting bundle of impressions devoid of stable essence? Is it a performative construct, a ritual mask done for strategic effect? Or a latent flame waiting to be revealed through gnosis and spiritual discipline? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one model over another, but in recognizing that the magical self resists reduction to a singular ontology. It is neither purely essential nor wholly illusory, but something in process, a dynamic unfolding, a becoming rather than a being. The self in magical traditions is less a fixed identity than a locus of potential, shaped, challenged, and reconfigured through ritual, symbol, and intentionality. Esoteric systems rarely insist on a single metaphysical truth. Instead, they present a spectrum of approaches, from the integrative ascent of Hermetic Qabalah and Thelema, which aim toward unification with a higher self or cosmic order, to the ironic multiplicities of chaos magic, which embrace disintegration, play, and self-authorship. Yet, across this diversity, a common thread remains. The self is the site of magical transformation. It is the crucible in which will, imagination, and cosmos converge. In this light, magic is not merely a means of altering the external world, it is a praxis of becoming. Perhaps it is not about changing the world, it is about becoming the kind of self who can. This is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this more philosophical musing on the self and esotericism. If you watched until this point, leave me a book emoji and congratulations, you're very committed to your learning. Let me also know in the comments if you like these more philosophical videos. I've done one in the past and it seemed like you guys liked it, so let me know if you want more of these. If you like my project of delivering free academic scholarship on all things esoteric, please consider supporting me because this project is really kept alive by you. By joining my fantastic Patreon community, you can also support me via PayPal, Coffee, YouTube memberships. You can super thank me in the comments and checking out my services at drangelapuka.com. Any kind of financial support really helps me and really helps keep this project going. So thank you so much for supporting. Even joining my Patreon at the lowest tier still is a massive help. So any kind of support you can give is massively appreciated. And also another way of supporting me is to share my videos around. So please help me to grow the Symposium. And if you like this video, don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, activate the notification bell so that you will never miss a new upload from me. Sign up for my newsletter on my website. It's a free way to enter my community and not rely on capricious social media algorithms. Leave me a comment because I really want to know what you thought about it. And again, share my videos around. That's really a great and free way to help me out. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope that you stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now. Today we hold the ground.